Hello, welcome back. And today we are going to be doing a bit of a different one. It's going to be more of a book review of this book here, which is called Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Now, this is personally my favorite books because there are like six of them. And in my personal opinion, of course, because everything here is my opinion, by the way, is that these books shall be remembered or shall be read as much as the Percy Jackson or the Harry Potter books, because in some ways I think actually these books are better than those two, especially Harry Potter. Percy Jackson I still like a lot, but I just like these books a little bit more. But that's maybe because they have a little bit more of a darker tone to them, which I'll explain later. Now, the basic synopsis of these books is that it follows a 16-year-old Jacob Portman who has lived in Florida for most of his life, and about the strange death of his grandfather, who was named Abraham Portman, or A for short, which is what I'm going to be calling him because everybody calls him Abe. Nobody calls him Abraham ever. And after his strange death, Jacob starts investigating a little bit more into his grandfather's past because his grandfather was a Polish Jew during World War II, and he has told him a little bit like he used to fight in World War II and that he had hid from the monsters, which he later realized were. I don't actually think if I'm allowed to say their name, but if you know World War II history, you think you might know who hated Jewish people, very much, or a specific group. Now, because he is delving more into his grandfather's past, he starts realizing more about who his grandfather was and more what happened before he was born, and also a little bit more about himself, because turns out he isn't as normal as he wants to be. Now, the setting of the books are real life, like straight up real life. They have the same history, technology, countries. It's real life up to a point. Now, what makes these books unique is that there is sort of this sub race of humans called peculiars or synagogues. If you say it in All Peculiar, I don't know if I butchered that name. And All Peculiar is basically like their own native language, which nobody basically in the books ever speak. I think it's one character who does it like sometimes like small sentences but or specific words, but otherwise they speak English. So that is just a fun thing. So what makes peculiars unique and what makes them a subrace of humans is that they have the supernatural or superpowers. Actually, they have superpowers. Now, some are a lot more like basic or something that you would expect, like superhuman strength, the ability to produce fire, or the ability to lift and through your mind. Then there are some that are a lot more peculiar, actually, is the best way to explain it. Like, one of my favorite characters, and which one which I'm going to be introducing, is his name is Hugh, and what makes him unique is that he has bees living in his stomach. And no, it doesn't hurt him, and sometimes when he opens his mouth, bees pop out. He can also manipulate bees in general, so he can just, like, okay, create a swarm of them. Now, it's those kind of abilities we're talking about. We're talking about, say, a girl who permanently floats, another girl who has a second mouth on the back of her head with teeth and all. So it's basically very strange powers. There are very few that are actually like, okay, I have seen these powers. Like, most of them are like, what the fuck are those? What the fuck is wrong with you? Or like, very much like, okay, those are unique as hell. Now, as I just stated, peculiars are or has been for a very long time as a race. They have been outcasts. They have been living in the shadows of society. It's because in now I'm gonna be going basic into the like very simplified into the lore. Is that in ancient Greek times they were seen as gods, mainly because back then they were more powerful. They were like giants and very much more powerful than they are in more modern times. But due to I think it's stated that it started like during medieval times, and after that they were basically treated like demons. Like they were hunted and killed because they were different from everybody else. And due to this, the peculiars started hiding, and this hiding started to go up after a specific incident called the Experiment of 1908, which was an experiment that created one of the peculiar dom, which is basically what peculiar society is called, their worst enemies, which are holocasts. They basically crawled out and caused a mess. Now, to explain a little bit more about, now I'm gonna go a little bit more into like backstory and what because it's kind of more important to very much to the story. Now, as I just stated, you're probably asking, but where comes Miss Peregrines in? Because she's on the cover and her name is in the title. Now, Miss Peregrine, or Alma LaFay Peregrine, as her actual full name is a part of a subrace of peculiars called imbrins. Now, imbrins have technically two powers. The first one is that they can turn into a bird. For Miss Peregrine, it's a peregrine falcon, which is why her name is Miss Peregrine. Same thing, we have like probably someone called Miss Raven who has a raven form. Now, this power is, I guess, decently useful, but what makes imprints so powerful and why they are very important to peculiardom as a whole is that they have the ability to manipulate time and to create something called loops. Now, loops is very simple. They repeat one day over and over again. For example, the first book is set in a loop that is permanently on September 3rd, 1940, meaning it's September 40th, that same date over and over again. Of course, time moves as normal, but it's permanently, for them, 1940. It's always been that way. Now, loops are very useful because they are technically immortal. I mean technically, because I'm going to explain that they're technically not, and there are two types of people that can't go in. Those are normals, which have, as I just stated, sorry if I move my hair a bit, that is just stated, they've been hunting peculiars for like a very long time, and whites, which are there are former peculiars who kind of went bad. Like, they are out for hunting. Or, sorry, it's hologast actually. Hologast can't enter loops. Now, when I said that they aren't technically immortal, it's because every time the loop resets, they skip a day. So say if you were, say, 10 when you came into the loop and you were there for 20 years, when you come back after 2 to 3 days, your body would instantly just flushing you with those 20 years. You would grow so you are then 30 into a body of a 30-year-old. Now, the problem is because after the hologast, hiding became their main options, meaning that most peculiars, if they were to go out, would be turned so far back or be so old that they would die, which is very bad because that means they're basically stuck in their loops and can't go anywhere. Now, Alma had two brothers named Bentham and Jack. Jack, we actually know his ability, which was that he could also turn into a peregrine falcon. Sadly not, and by the way, just so you know that imbrins can sadly only be females, meaning male. There have been no male imbrints ever, because they can't be. Now, Jack could turn into a peregrine falcon, and he and his brother especially had a concept, because one thing which has made peculiardom so hard and so hard to connect is that they are very separated. There are like very few of them. I think he said 100,000 is the population of peculiardom. And the problem is that they are all like, okay, there are 10 up here in Norway, 12 down in Africa. That's the main problem, is that they are very separated by the maps. And because most of them can't live for very long, meaning they can't get far enough so they can actually reach, but anywhere without them potentially dying from aging forward because they are that old, because they become that old. Now, Bentham created a machine called the Panluptical, which the basic idea is that you are able to go into a door and then appear in another loop. Meaning, say, a loop in China and a loop in Russia would be able to trade with each other, which would be impossible originally because, well, those two would have been so far away that it would be impossible to travel there without aging forward. Now, Jack had a obsession of his own, which was that he was obsessed with this thing called the Library of Souls. Now, the Library of Souls is very simple. it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a library full of peculiar souls. Now, what makes peculiars is that instead of having one soul like all normals have, they have a second one, a peculiar one, which is how their abilities come to be. Now, basically, the way that they see peculiar souls, they see them a lot like books. Meaning, if you say were to take a book out of a library, you will be checking out the book, meaning you will have it. But when a peculiar does it, they check out one of the souls from the library of souls. And when they die, that soul comes back to the library and they check in it again. And repeat. Now, what makes these especially most powerful is because they are very ancient peculiar souls. And just as a frame of reference, peculiars have been becoming weaker and weaker because they have been more used to hiding and not more fighting, meaning their abilities are not that strong in more modern times. They are not pretty weak, actually. Now, this caused the two brothers to argue and bent them creating the experiment that was supposed to kill his brother because his brother was evil, but turned him and his group of people into hologast. Now, hologast are basically, the best way to explain them is kind of like Slenderman, actually, in like height. Now, instead of having arms, they have like these stubs, and what makes them especially gross is that they have, instead of one tongue, they have four, and they're a lot like tentacles, like they are able to move around on their own. Now, what makes a hologast especially dangerous is that they're invisible, meaning you can't see them. Like, okay, there is technically one way to see them through their shadows, but hollows were smart enough to realize that that would be a stupid idea, meaning nowadays they only really hunt or are active during night, where their shadows can be hidden between darkness. Now, think about it, like, you probably have like a weak ability, like, okay, you're telekinetic, but only with food products like knives and such. And then you're gonna be fighting a invisible creature that can easily kill you in one shot. So yeah, basically most peculiars are absolutely fucking terrified of those things. Now, there are a certain group of peculiars that have the ability to see them, which Jacob and his brother and his grandfather Abraham are a part of. And it is explained that during World War II, there was also a second war going on, which was called the Hollow War, which Abraham was a part of, because, well, his ability is all about hologas, so I guess he would be the best equipped for fighting those things. Now, in total, the ability has technically like 3 different types. First of all, people with it can see them, which is pretty simple. They just see hologas wandering around. The second is sensing. Now, the sensing is, at least in the beginning, very much explained like the idea of your stomach cramping up and basically becoming a basically like eating it, feeling of your stomach getting eaten from the inside out. Basically, it's very painful. But if a hollow person with disability were to say want to focus a little more, it would be more changing into a needle, which will be moving with the hologast and will only dissipate when the hologast is killed, or in general anything else happens to it. The second, or at least the third ability, which is actually the most powerful, is that people with this ability can speak the hollow's language, and by doing it they can also control them, meaning you will have a extra person which can attack. Now, I just stated that there are said to be other people who have had this ability. For example, there is a man named H, which can actually do what Abraham and Jacob can do. Now, you're probably wondering, because it's also canonically that Jacob can see soul jars, or where the peculiar second soul is stored in the library. Now, you're probably wondering how those two things have in common. Now, basically, the best way to explain that is that the librarians, which is what they were called, those who worked in the library, they were kind of hologast, actually. They were hologast, or at least a more older version of hologast. Unlike their more modern equivalents that are mindless, pretty animalistic, these hollows were smart. They were able to feel, they were able to think properly. Now they were, of course, also protecting. Like they were very much feared, but in also some ways they were also respected because they protected the library and therefore also peculiardom as a whole, or at least a part of it. Now, the reason why Abraham and Jacob can do this is because, as I just stated, they're descended from Hologast, meaning they have that connection with Hologast, which allows them to do what they are allowed to do. Now, it's stated by Jacob, as we see in the final book, that if a librarian in human form were to eat or consume a soul from the library, they would temporarily turn into a Hologast. Now, it is also stated that more times you use this ability, the more there's a bigger chance that you will turn permanently into a Hologast. But personally, if I were to protect basically an ancient place where my entirety of people rely on, and I had to choose between a normal human form and a freakishly invisible monster form, I would actually take the second option for protecting because it's just a lot more easier. So this is a very I know this is a very weird video in general, but I just wanted to talk about the series. And if you want to know more or want more videos on these book series, I could actually do it. Goodbye.